All right, let's dive into a really fascinating story. It's all about a group of people who looked at the world around them and believed that a huge foundational rule, one of the 10 commandments, in fact, had been broken and pretty much forgotten for centuries. This is a story about what happens when you decide to challenge tradition, all in the name of truth. So think about it like this. Imagine a giant protective wall around a city. But over time, a huge section has just crumbled away, leaving everyone inside totally vulnerable. Well, our story today explores a very similar idea. What happens when a critical piece of a foundational law gets changed, and what does it actually take to rebuild it? So, where does this all start? Well, our story begins with a group of people who spotted what they saw as a really serious problem, a crack in what the source material calls the very foundation of God's law. And at the absolute heart of this problem is the Sabbath. Now, according to our source, this isn't just some minor suggestion, it's the fourth of the 10 commandments. The text describes it as a weekly reminder of creation. It's kind of like an artist's signature on a beautiful painting that says, hey, I made this. It's meant to point right back to the creator. The source uses a really specific word here, a breach. It argues that this breach happened when Roman authorities decided to officially change the day of worship. And we're not talking about a tiny little crack here. A breach is a serious break in a defense. It's that huge missing part of the wall we were just imagining, leaving the whole structure exposed. Okay, so if you find a giant hole in a wall, you don't just stand there and stare at it, right? You fix it. And that brings us to the second part of our story, the mission. A call went out for a group of people to become, well, rebuilders. The source points to this prophecy from Isaiah as basically the official job description. And just think about that title for a second, the repairer of the breach. Wow, this wasn't about patching a small hole. This was about completely restoring a lost pathway so people could find their way back to that original foundation. And this mission wasn't just some random idea. It had a clear three-step roadmap. First, they had to show people the problem, this breach that they might not have even noticed. Second, they had to dig back through history to find the original blueprint, what the text calls the foundations of many generations. And finally, their big goal was to restore the Sabbath to its rightful place as the Creator's memorial. But like any great quest, this one was absolutely filled with challenges. These reformers weren't just rebuilding a wall, they were trying to do it while facing a world that honestly didn't even think the wall was broken to begin with. This slide just lays out the core conflict perfectly. On one side, you have the reformers, holding up the ancient text. On the other side, the opposition, who were relying on tradition and, let's be real, social pressure. You can almost hear the emotion in their arguments, can't you? But this is what our ancestors did, or we don't want to be different from everyone else. It was a classic showdown, scripture versus tradition. According to the source, this one question reveals everything about the opposition's mindset. Their first instinct wasn't to ask, so what does the rulebook actually say? Nope. It was, why don't the experts agree with you? And that really highlights a deep-seated trust in human authority over their own personal investigation. So how in the world could a small group of people possibly stand against such widespread opposition and all these arguments? Well, the source says they had one single powerful tool, a guidebook that they trusted above everything else. This verse right here, this was their measuring stick. For these reformers, every single opinion, every tradition, every clever argument had to be tested against one thing, the Bible. If an idea didn't line up with what they read in the scriptures, they basically concluded it just wasn't based on truth. Simple as that. And this is why they were so confident. The source argues that, armed with this guidebook, anyone, and I mean anyone, not just scholars or experts with fancy degrees, could understand the truth for themselves. They believed the text itself was a great equalizer, giving them a direct line to wisdom that didn't depend on your social status. And all of that brings us to the ultimate lesson of the story. Because really, it's not just about a specific rule. It's about what it takes to stand for any truth when it's inconvenient or really, really unpopular. The source makes a super powerful claim here. It says the biggest obstacle to truth is simple that embracing it is often inconvenient and makes you unpopular. And you know what? That's the one argument that's kind of hard to deny, because it's often true, isn't it? Standing up for what's right when you're in the minority almost always comes with a personal cost. And this quote just perfectly sums up the reformers' core philosophy. It's a powerful call to action. Do the right thing simply because it is the right thing, not because it's popular, not because you've calculated all the outcomes, but purely out of principle. The source really argues that if you believe you've found an important truth, you have a kind of duty to share it. You're not trying to win a popularity contest. You do it simply because it's the right thing to do, even if people misunderstand you or even call you a troublemaker for it. So in the end, this whole story is really a tribute to all reformers. The text makes it clear that history is moved forward by individuals, people of principle, people of faith, and people of daring who are willing to stand up, repair the breach, and restore the foundations. So we're left with a question to really think about. This story was about a specific religious reform, sure, but the core idea, well, that applies to all of us. When is it most important to stand up for what you believe, even if you have to stand completely alone? When does doing what's right matter more than doing what's easy? That's definitely something worth thinking about.